Hello, and welcome to the eighth episode of the Void Wave podcast. For this time, in a sort of a Halloween theme, we're going to discuss what many consider to be a horror movie, which is called Eraserhead.
Yeah, a David Lynch classic, Eraserhead from 1977. A lot of people call it a horror movie, but it certainly has some horror elements to it, but in a roundabout way, I'd say it's also more of a drama movie, maybe. But it certainly fits the season well. And Lynch is obviously a pretty polarizing director. Like, for me personally, his movies are either very hit or miss. Like, I either love them or I hate them, and Eraserhead is definitely one of his movies that I enjoy a great deal.
Yeah, I would say this movie is more sort of an art house experimental drama movie where the psychological side of the characters comes out physically into the physical realm. A bit of body horror. It took ages to be made, which probably contributed to this whole thing. And
I think it took like seven years or something.
Yeah, something like 7 years, because Lynch had to kind of keep going back and asking for more money, which is kind of will make, I think, any movie look a bit experimental, as the actors who shoot the scene one day and then in the same scene they're 7 years older, right?
Yeah, it's kind of strange.
Yeah, so it's always going to be a bit like that.
Yeah, he did some work on the movie though. Like he did write the script. He was also the producer, I think. He did direct, obviously, and he also did large parts of like the soundtrack and the sound design for the movie, I think.
Yeah, that's
which is
right.
Great, by the way. Like, the sound design is one of the most enjoyable aspects of the movie, for me at least.
What I found super interesting about this movie, besides all the other stuff we're going to talk about later, is how this kind of set the tone for a lot of the Lynch mythology and aesthetics, pretty much. If we go back to the third season of Twin Peaks, a lot of the things that appear in Eraserhead will appear in season 3 of Twin Peaks, which is like completely different characters and different scenario. But a lot of like the same figures and characters and soundtrack and an obsession with steam and electricity and people living in the moon, or kind of in some kind of rock planet that's not Earth. There's a lot of kind of plus the diegetic music, people appearing on screen and singing and being on a stage, and that being part of sort of a thing that's happening inside people's heads, but also really exists in the physical world. All that stuff appears in 1977 with Eraserhead, and we'll see all of that appear again, for example, in Twin Peaks season 3, but also in other David Lynch movies throughout the 43 years between the two productions, or should I say 42 years between the two productions.
Yeah, like a lot of his, like the symbolism or metaphor he uses, like the electricity you mentioned, and like a bunch of other stuff that's kind of recurrent through a lot of his work. Like, I'm not an expert in decoding that kind of stuff, but I know there's like a bunch of, like, he has a very avid fan base who do like fan interpretations and stuff. I never really got into that too much, but I'm gonna try my best in interpreting that kind of stuff while we are discussing the movie. And Eraserhead, it has some very strong like sexual and procreational themes, so I thought it might be a good fit for the podcast. And like overall, I'd say the main theme of the movie is like how the main character, Henry Spencer, is dealing with his fear or the horror he is experiencing when he's suddenly becoming a father. So that's also, of course, very topical. And yeah, just going straight in the opening, we see Henry Spencer's head kind of floating in space, and he's semi-translucent, and in the background you can see like this rocky planet moon thing. And we go into the moon, and we learn that there's a man living inside this moon or planet, and he is tending to some kind of machinery with all sorts of levers going on. And then we cut to the outside again, and there's this ghostly sperm-like looking thing emerging from Spencer's mouth. And the man in the moon pulls a lever, and the sperm suddenly just flies off, and it falls into a lake or a pool of liquid, shall we say? And yeah, that's basically the opening scene, and you already see it's kind of weird and surreal and crazy. And I think that one is pretty straightforward to interpret if you've seen like the whole movie. That's the conception scene, I guess.
Yeah, and also, I mean, this figure, this man on the moon figure, his body is kind of alien-like because he's covered in sort of boils or some sort of rash.
Some kind of rash on his face, and
yeah,
he's mostly covered in darkness, so we don't really see what's going on with him. But he looks really strange and kind of imposing and dangerous.
Yeah, and when he's, I think, pulling the levers, I mean, that's, to me, right? So all of the things I will say in the next half hour, 1 hour, are things related to, this is my opinion, right? I didn't go and dig into the fandom's interpretation of the movie. So
me neither. So
so for me, the pulling of the levers and all that stuff is exactly like a visual metaphor for, you know, we're not completely in control of our actions. Like we have all these people, I guess, in our heads pulling the levers and kind of commanding us to do certain things which we might not want to do. And in this case, he conceives a child, or rather, he drops his sperm into a pond, right, into this wetness.
Yeah, it's kind of on the nose if you think.
Yeah, it's a bit on the nose, isn't it? I mean, the creatures that we see all the time in the movie, they absolutely look like sperm, right? Like big head and the wiggly tail. They're just very big, right? Several orders of magnitude bigger than an actual sperm. And that's how the movie begins, and it's a really good beginning because it kind of sets the tone and the theme, and it just lets you know kind of what the movie's going to be about, and also the kind of metaphors and visual representation that things are going to have.
Yeah, you already know, like right off the bat, that you're going to be in for a trip, right? Because it's a really surreal opening scene, and I think the camera submerges like into the pool, and then the screen goes dark, and we re-emerge through a bright white opening, and we see Spencer standing in front of a factory-looking building, which is presumably his workplace, and he looks pretty anxious, and that's a recurrent theme throughout the movie. He looks very anxious and nervous and stressed all the time.
Yeah, I find it very interesting that so the story is very focused on Spencer's point of view, like what he's experiencing and what he's feeling. So everything that happens, he's like in the middle, or we're just looking directly into his head. And we never get a sense of where he lives. Like we see a place, like his apartment, which looks a lot like a movie set, and we know it's a movie set. And like these scenes outside with these kind of wasteland, ruinous, depopulated spaces. But, you know, we never kind of meet his co-workers, for example, or get a sense of if he lives in the United States, right? Or if he lives elsewhere. So everything is kind of very dreamlike.
Yeah, it's also very atemporal, I guess. It's not really clear, like, is this the 70s, or is this, like, it's certainly past like the Industrial Revolution, because there's a lot of like nasty looking industrial landscape going on, but like it's not really clear where and when the movie is set. So it's really, it's dreamlike or nightmarish.
Yeah, I mean, to keep the theme of our podcast, you could even say that could be set in the Brooklyn of Last Exit to Brooklyn, for example, right?
Yeah,
because there's also all these streets that kind of lots of trash around and buildings that have been partly destroyed or bombed, and all of this stuff could be, in theory, where Spencer lives, except a black and white, paranoid, schizophrenic version of that, I think. But we
forgot to mention that the whole movie is shot in black and white, which works quite well, I think, for this movie.
Yeah.
Like sometimes I feel like if modern directors do it, it's a bit gimmicky, but here it definitely works. Oh yeah, and see, he makes his way home basically from his workplace. to his apartment building, and he goes up the elevator to his flat, and there one of his neighbors, a woman, informs him that a girl called Mary tried to call him and that he's invited for dinner. And he doesn't really look too happy. Goes into his flat, puts on some music to relax, and he can't really clear his head, I guess. There's this hissing noise that's coming from his from his radiator, and like as he gets like more and more lost in his thoughts, like the hissing noise becomes louder and louder, which I think is an interesting way of showing that, because the movie has very little dialogue, and a lot of what's going on is either communicated just through visuals or through the sound design, right? And this basically goes on in the next shot where Spencer's like, he's just kind of blankly staring out of his window, and there's a brick wall right in front of the window, which later on in the movie isn't there anymore. So, you know, you can really see that like this whole movie is more or less taking place inside of his head, right? And what we see on screen is a visual representation of how he feels and the kind of thoughts he has. And like the brick wall, I would interpret that he just doesn't know how to act in that moment. Like he walks over to a drawer and he pulls out a ripped in half picture of Mary, as we learn later, which hints kind of that they were like having a relationship or dating, and it somehow failed. And then he ripped up the picture, and now she's calling him all of a sudden and asks him to come for dinner. So he's even more anxious now.
Yeah, and then the scene with Mary's family. I mean, obviously, it couldn't be like a normal family, whatever normal means in this case. Yeah. So the family is there's a lot of kind of horrific things about the family. Like he gets there and there's a dog feeding her puppies, but the puppies make like this gruesome noise when they're feeding, right? So there's the soundtrack doesn't match what we'd expect the sounds that things would make, right? In this case, the puppy suckling on the mom, on the dog mother, they make a kind of a disgusting noise, right? So this
high pitched squeaking noise, which, you know, kind of sounds like an animal, but also not.
Yeah,
like it feels very unnatural and off. Like everything in this movie feels off.
Yeah, and of course, you know, the dog mother feeding her puppies. That's kind of related to his horror of becoming a parent, marriage and responsibility, even, I would say. So everything kind of ties in. Yeah,
and like the scene at the house of Marion with her parents, I like that scene a lot because it's so awkward all the time. Like he enters the house and like we're introduced to Mary's mom, and she asks him to sit down, and he sits down on a couch or a sofa next to Mary, and there's like a lot of space in between them, and they both look super uncomfortable, and the mom is, you know, trying to do small talk with him, but it's all very slow, and there's a lot of awkward pauses in between. And then Mary all of a sudden has this weird kind of seizure going on, or fit. Like she just all of a sudden starts making like very strange noises, and her mom is touching her hair for a couple of seconds, and then it's over. And like honestly, I have no idea why this is happening in the movie. And Spencer, he ignores it basically. He just keeps talking about, you know, what the mother asked about, like his job at the factory as a printer, and he just kind of ignores it.
Yeah, it's. I mean, when we say that all of this is kind of happening inside Spencer's head in a way, he's always trying to get things back to some sort of normal, right? But the fact is he's surrounded by things like this, right? The scene and this strange family, and, you know, both the daughter, so his girlfriend or ex-girlfriend, kind of has this fit, but also the mother later also has a fit, and the father has a very nonsensical monologue as well.
Yeah. Like the father, Bill, like he just enters the room at some point and starts talking about like some very random things, like about laying pipes in his knees. And he also talks about the chicken, which is what they're having for dinner later. And this is a very clever bit of, you know, foreshadowing, I think, where he talks about the chicken are very unnaturally small and they're a man-made, whatever that means.
Yeah.
then later on, when a dinner is served, Bill, the father, asks Spencer to have the dubious honor of cutting the chicken, right? And Spencer is very unsure, and he asks, "Oh, shall I cut it like regular chicken?" And Bill just says, "Yes, do it." And then he's about to cut the chicken, and it all of a sudden starts like squirming around on his plate, and there's blood spurting out of it, and the mom is having the fit and seizure and has to leave the room. Like, it's all very, very strange, but I think this is foreshadowing to the climax of the movie, which happens later on, of course.
Yeah, it's quite clever. And so after that happens, kind of the mother kind of gets serious with him and tells him that there's a baby that's been born prematurely, and he's the father, and then they're gonna have to marry. And what I found interesting about this is that this happened at around 30 minutes in, which if we were doing classical cinema, this would be exactly where you would have the first plot point, right?
Oh, yeah.
So this matches exactly, like if you were telling, let's say, a straight story, and Straight Story is the name of David Lynch's more normal film, by the way. So if you're telling like a straight story, like a normal cinematic movie, you would place this event of him being told about the child already existing and being forced to marriage, you would place it exactly at the 30 minutes mark, and David Lynch does that. So it's timed
pretty well, because it's really, the movie is about 90 minutes long, and it's exactly the first third of the movie where this is happening, so it fits perfectly. And like he's informed that he's gonna be a father, or he is a father already, because the baby has already been born.
So it's too late.
Mary
right?
makes it's too late. Yeah, and Mary makes a strange remark that she isn't sure if it even is a baby, which at that point, if you haven't seen the movie, doesn't really make any sense, because how doesn't she know whether or not it's a baby? I mean, she must have born that thing, right? But later on, when you see the movie, see the baby, I mean, this becomes clear, because then there's a little bit of cut and a bit of fast forward, and they presumably got married off screen, and Mary is sitting in Spencer's flat at a table and is trying to feed the baby, quote unquote, because it doesn't really look like a baby at all. It's also like this oversized sperm-like creature in a way, which looks kind of disgusting, but it's a nice prop, I have to say, a nice practical effect. Yeah, and she's trying to feed the baby, but the baby spits out the food, and she gets frustrated, and it's really like you immediately get the feeling that this is really hard for her to deal with. And meanwhile, Spencer is going down to the mailbox, and he received a very, very tiny package, and he goes outside to open it, and inside of the package there's this worm-like thingy, which we really don't know what it exactly is, and he puts it back into the box and brings it into the apartment, but he doesn't really say anything, and just lays down on the bed and starts staring at the hissing radiator again. And then all of a sudden, like behind the radiator, there's like an opening in the wall all of a sudden, and we are confronted with this empty theater stage with a spotlight, right? And this also doesn't really make sense whatsoever at this point in the movie. And Mary asks him if there was anything in the mail, and Spencer just straight up lies to her and says no, there wasn't anything. And then later on at night, he secretly gets up and puts the worm-like thing from the box into like a closet, like a tiny closet. And the way I interpret like this thingy, this is him hiding away his desires, basically. Because then later on, there's a very extended or pretty long dream sequence in which like the thing comes out of the closet, so to speak. And we're gonna go into that a little bit later.
Yeah,
I guess.
I mean, the conflict for Spencer is pretty much between kind of this imposed responsibility of taking care of the baby, and his I guess gut feeling or instinct not to do so. Like, he doesn't want to take care of that baby. He doesn't want to take on that responsibility. So there's a lot of these kind of the dream sequence that we see later is exactly about that, and the bit about hiding the thing in the closet, etc. That all kind of ties in with that. We see that appear in other Lynch movies, where kind of these subconscious desires appear in the physical world, like for example in Lost Highway. Sorry for the spoilers, where this man's desire to kill his wife appears as a person, right?
The man, mystery man.
Mystery man. And this kind of happens in a lot of Lynch films, and I think it's quite clear, like looking at the film in Eraserhead in its entirety, that's what he's doing. Like, all of a sudden, this thing has been forced on him, the marriage, the baby, etc. And he just has all these desires, which he tries to kind of tuck in, right? He tries to kind of put them in boxes and or reject them, try to reject them as much as possible. Although there's only so much you can do.
Yeah, it just becomes kind of impossible for him to act out these desires without like conflicting with his responsibility towards his new wife and the baby. And he's still like interested in sex very much. Like there's one scene which is right after I think the scene where he hides the worm thingy in the closet, where he tries to touch Mary and she just straight up rejects him, which is, I guess, just about the stress of having a baby, which is, killing the couple's sex life if they even had one, because they haven't seen each other for months apparently before he got the call, come over to dinner.
Yeah, let alone let alone the risk of making another baby like that one.
Oh yeah, that comes up later, and I think it's already in the dream sequence. And the baby it's really hard to deal with. It doesn't stop crying, and Mary gets up in the middle of the night, and she's really on edge, and decides to leave for her parents, to stay there to get some sleep. And Spencer kind of flips her off, but immediately, like, the expression on his face is very uncertain about that. But she leaves anyway, and Spencer is now alone with the baby. And then he all of a sudden notices that the baby is quiet, and he takes the temperature, and it turns out that the baby is sick, because he turns around and all of a sudden the baby has this weird like pustules all over its face and like a rattling voice, as if it's got a cold. And Spencer struggles to take care of the baby, and he at one point gets up to take a look at the worm thing in the closet again, and then tries to leave the flat, but the baby starts crying again as soon as he opens the door. And this happens twice, I think, and it's basically the baby makes it impossible for him to follow on his desires, right? And then he eventually goes to bed, and that's where the long dream sequence begins.
Yeah, can I just say that Mary leaves him alone with the baby, so forever, pretty much. Exactly.
She never comes back.
Yeah, she never comes back. So she leaves exactly in the middle of the movie, which in classical filmmaking or classical screenwriting is when you put the point of no return, right? Which is where you put the point where the story cannot go except towards its kind of causal conclusion, its logical conclusion. So,
very true for this movie.
Lynch being very classic in terms of kind of the screenwriting beats. He's very classical filmmaker.
Yeah, I mean, this was his first like full-length movie he made. I think he only directed like short movies before that. So maybe he was trying to make it a little bit more by the books in terms of structure, considering how experimental the rest of the movie is.
Yeah,
I don't know.
And he also received a lot of some of the funding was from the what's it called, American Film Institute, I think, where he was studying, and to get any kind of funding like this, you have to go through a lot of approvals, right? So if you want to make it wild in one side, like the dialogue, the sets, the special effects, you probably need to kind of concede in other aspects, right? In this case, how you organize the information chronologically in a story. So it's very classical in that sense. So let's talk about the scene inside the radiator.
Oh yeah, the stage behind or inside the radiator. I'm not really sure if it's behind or inside it. So yeah, this is his dream sequence, and we're at the stage, and there's this strange woman which is like dancing around, and I don't know why, but she has these enormous cheeks. And I'm not talking about her butt here. Like she has like these like squirrel like cheeks. I don't know why that is, but she has them. And she's dancing on the stage, kind of smiling at the camera. I guess we have to take that as smiling at Spencer, the spectator. And all of a sudden, there's all of these sperm-like things again falling, like out of the sky, I guess, onto the stage. And initially, she's just dancing around them, but she's also like looking at the camera with this kind of expression on it. Oh, do you want me to do it? Right? Like as if she's waiting for permission to stomp on them. And this is what she eventually does. She starts squashing or stomping the sperm-like thingies.
Yeah, there's
It's a kind of strange scene.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of, in terms of symbols, it's pretty obvious, right? That's his
his desire.
Yeah, to crush reproduction, I guess. Literally,
crush reproduction. Yeah,
literally crush reproduction. The giant sperm.
Yeah, and then we have a really strange cut to the scene of Spencer in bed, and Mary is there all of a sudden, and she's making strange noises and moving around and taking up too much space in the bed. So he wakes up, and then to his horror, he finds that there's also a bunch of these sperm-like things in the bed.
Yeah.
And he just takes them and smashes them against the apartment wall. And this is again, his desire to get rid of the baby, I guess. And we have a nice little shot of a spotlight on the closet again, which may be his desire for having sex again, but being afraid of another pregnancy. I guess that's how I would interpret that one.
Yeah, but but Spencer does have kind of sexual desires still.
Oh yeah, that comes later. Yeah, comes up later again in the dream sequence, because it's a really long dream sequence. I didn't stop the time, but it goes on forever. And then the closet is opening up by its own all of a sudden, and the worm-like thing starts to move, and it just kind of runs around a bit and dances on this mound of dirt he has on his bedside table, which also again comes up later. And it opens up his mouth, and the camera enters the mouth, and that's, I guess, where his desire becomes unleashed in his dream, basically.
Yeah, there's a lot of kind of dreams inside dreams in this.
Yeah, it's really hard to distinguish sometimes whether or not we're in a dream sequence or not. Like, this is really the only sequence in the movie where I'm pretty confident in saying, okay, this is all in a dream. And we enter the creature's mouth, and then we cut to somebody knocking on the door, and Spencer gets up to take a look at it, and it's really dark outside, and it's his neighbor, the woman who earlier told him that Mary tried to call him, and she's essentially trying to seduce him, right? Like, she's saying, "Oh, I locked myself out of the apartment, and it's already too late," and he doesn't really say anything, so she just enters the apartment, and the baby starts crying, and Spencer just puts his hand onto the baby, like he muffles it, as if he's like ashamed of her seeing that, or afraid of her seeing or noticing the baby. And she says something like, "Oh, is your wife not here?" And Spencer isn't sure. Just, "Oh, she must be back at her parents." And then she walks over to Spencer, and they start kissing. Or, well, she initiates the kiss, more or less. He's very passive throughout basically the entirety of the movie. He doesn't really do much. He only has stuff done to him.
Yeah, except at the end.
Except at the end, yeah. And the next scene, like, the bed has transformed into like this pool of liquid again, which is kind of similar to what we saw in the opening scene, in the conception scene. And Spencer and the woman are kind of preparing to have sex. And she starts looking towards the baby, which is crying again, but Spencer turns her gaze back at him. And then they both like submerge into this pool of liquid. And then we are back again at the stage in the radiator, where the woman with the strange cheeks appears again, and she sings a song to him, which is about heaven. I'm also not really sure how to interpret that one. Maybe you've got any ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just his desire, or kind of his desire to have his cake and eat it too. In this case, it's the kind of to fulfill his kind of sexual needs, but without the responsibility or the association with parenthood. To me, that's where it comes from.
Yeah, he later on joins her on the stage, and all the stomped dead sperm thingies are still laying around, and she opens her hands to him, and he touches them, and then there's two bright flashes, and then suddenly she's gone, and it's the man from the moon or planet thingy who is standing there very briefly. Then he disappears as well, and then there's this card which has like a larger version of this third mount he has on his bedside table, which is just rolling out onto the stage, and he's looking frightened and gets onto some kind of platform and starts doing something with his hands with one of the rails. And then there's like the only scene in the movie which I guess could qualify for a jump scare. I honestly found it kind of funny because it was just like everything in that scene is so random, and like he's standing there on the platform doing the thing with his hands, and all of a sudden like something shoots out of his neck and pops his head off, and it falls onto the stage, which like I guess this is also maybe pretty on the nose in terms of metaphor, because it's literally him losing his mind, right?
Mm-hmm. And also
like he can't deal with
the father being replaced by the son, I guess, something like that, because his head becomes the same as the baby's head.
Yeah, we learned after that the thing that popped his head up out, which came out of his neck, is the baby. So you have this weird thingy where you have like the torso of a grown man, and there's this little sperm-like creature coming out of his neck.
Yeah, I think to me that's the second plot point, because that means he feels that his identity has been replaced with the identity of the baby, or rather his identity as a father to that baby, right? Which is,
I guess this
that kind of sets everything else in motion, and it's kind of an escalation of what had happened before, because before it was just an inconvenience, right? But after that, it becomes something that he must deal with. Otherwise, he'll become the child, or his whole personality will be subsumed into this parenthood role and the caretaker for the baby role. And I think that's what it means, or rather, in the terms of the kind of the mechanically moving the plot along. I think that's what it stands for. There's that. After that, there's a really weird sequence, by the way. But yes, go on. Sorry.
Oh yeah, this one is really strange. But yeah, I also thought that he's maybe having a fear of like being subsumed completely by his new role as a father, where literally the baby is replacing his head, and this is basically all he is now, the father guy, right?
Yeah, when people look at him and they see the baby instead of him, right? And the fact it's the head, it's not totally innocent, because the head is where we store our identity, right? We remember people by their faces, not by, well, usually, not by what's below their necks. So the fact that the head is replaced, the identity is replaced, and how people see you is replaced, and he goes from being himself to becoming just as just the father, right, or the baby. And in this case, especially hideous fate, I would say, because his baby is, well, sorry to say, monstrous.
Oh yeah, it's pretty ugly. I think it's fair to say.
Barely human, right? I mean, it looks like a stillborn lamb or something like that.
Yeah, it looks more like an animal fetus, almost. Like very monstrous in a way. And then his head is just lying on the stage, and there's blood coming again from the Mount of Dirt, which mirrors a little bit the scene in the beginning where the blood was oozing out of the chicken. And the blood is covering all of the stage, and the head just gets sucked into it, and then randomly, at a seemingly random location, like falls out of the sky. And the head is cracked, and there's an old man who sees it, but there's also a boy who runs in and takes it and runs off. And the old man is kind of stretching out his hand as if he wanted that head as well. that's also one of the scenes I'm not really sure how to interpret that one, to be honest.
Yeah, I was doing some research, and David Lynch said he just had a dream that was like that, including the pencil factory and all that stuff that happens afterwards. And knowing Lynch, how we know him 40 years after this film, you can just say, yeah, you know.
Yeah, sometimes it's just random shit that he dreamed up and decided to put into a script, right?
Yeah.
That's his method, in a way.
Yeah, I mean, his head is basically used as a resource to make erasers for pencils, right?
Oh, yeah,
I don't think
that's
there's
where
anything...
The title from the movie comes from, I guess.
Yeah.
Because the boy takes it to this workshop or pencil factory, and they drill into it and pull a bit of it out, and then they make pencils out of him.
Yeah, literally. Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah. I can tell you, like, except for this part about his head literally being made into erasers, to me, whenever I think of the title Eraserhead, I always think of the components of a magnetic audio recorder, right? So you have the recording heads, which is where kind of the magnetic charge goes into, and it aligns the little magnetic particles on the tape, and the Eraserhead, which is this massively strong for a small device like a recorder, which kind of applies like a very strong magnetic current, and what it does is it kind of removes the alignment from all the magnetic particles in the tape. So whenever I think Eraserhead, I always think of like that, and then I always think of something erasing somebody's personality, right?
Yeah, that's like the only interpretation I could come up with this scene or the title of the movie. I guess that he's really scared that the baby is changing his life so much that basically the person that he used to be ceases to exist.
Yeah, it just becomes like a resource, right? Just a material from which other objects are made, right?
Yeah. And we also get this nice shot of these mass-produced pencils. So maybe there's some kind of message there as well. I'm really not sure. But yeah, that's basically the end of the dream sequence, and we get back to like the normal quote-unquote world, where Spencer is laying awake in bed, and he gets dressed. Mary is still not there, and he hears something outside of his apartment, and he opens the door and he sees his neighbor woman, and she's standing there with a sleazy looking guy who is touching her, and they are making out, and she looks at him, and the camera switches, and for a moment his head is again replaced with that of the baby. So like she doesn't see him as himself, she only sees him as the guy with the baby.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, that it wasn't just him perceiving himself as becoming replaced with the baby, but him seeing his personality and what he appears to others as changing as well.
Yeah.
Because what sets off that dream sequence is when they're kind of in this pool of sexual desire, literally, I guess, and he's ashamed of the baby, right? He's trying.
Yeah, he tries to hide it.
Yeah, he's trying for her to see him as a man, not a father, right? A sexual man a man that's desirable, not like this person whose primary responsibility and identity is the caretaker of the baby. So I think that's how I interpret it, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much how I interpret it as well.
Funnily enough, the baby does something which he's never done before, which is the baby starts mocking him.
Starts laughing.
Yeah, starts laughing.
Really sadistically.
Yeah.
In a way. And yeah, like Spencer, he that's probably the point at which he really made the decision, okay, I'm gonna kill this baby. Because he then walks over to a drawer and he pulls out a pair of scissors, and he hesitates for a moment, but then he begins to cut it open, like just as he was supposed to do with the chicken at the dinner scene. Like that was kind of good, I think, because he really he spreads it open. It's kind of disgusting, but it's really like he's dismembering this chicken, right? And he stares at the baby's innards and then rams the scissors into it and then recoils in horror immediately after, and the baby is having its death struggle, I guess, which is also kind of trippy because there's all these weird like mush like substance coming out of his body, and it's like a lot of mush. It's way more than should realistically fit into this tiny body.
Yeah, but we said it's a horror movie, right? So there's always more gore than you expect to happen. It's like when in horror movies somebody gets stabbed and then there's all this squirting of blood coming out, and in reality it's not a squirt, it's more like a little drip, right? Unless you hit a major artery or something. But it's part of the genre that the baby would make all that blood.
I guess it's also fitting because it's the climax of the movie, right? And it has to be like overly dramatic because also the lights start flickering and there's sparks flying out of the socket at the wall, and the baby's neck is all of a sudden like very elongated and like it's almost snake-like, and then in the next scene like the head is really, really huge and comes at him, and then finally the light dies and we cut back to where we were at the beginning of the movie, which is in space at this kind of planet, this rocky planet or moon, and its surface is cracking and there's a hole that's bursting into it. And we see Spencer again looking at the planet, and we kind of get sucked into the hole where we see the man at his levers, and it looks like he's struggling to keep control of whatever machine he's operating there, right? And I think that is also pretty straightforward to interpret, because whatever this man is representing, maybe his instinct or his uncontrollable will, which was controlling his actions throughout the entire movie. Maybe it's his fear. That's also an interpretation. I think it's pretty valid.
Yeah, but at least
he overcame that in taking the decision on acting on his desire.
I mean, you could interpret the man on the moon pulling levers and all that stuff as like the social mores, right? Or expectations of him. Yeah.
Yeah, like there's responsibility he feels, maybe.
Yeah, I think
which is
a Freudian maybe would call it the superego, right?
Maybe it's the superego. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of controlling his action, controlling through guilt and societal expectations.
Yeah. And what would the woman with the strange cheeks would be?
That's the it.
Psychoanalytic. Would that be the it? Yeah, I guess it is, because she's kind of taunting him to act on his desire, right?
Yeah.
When she stomps the fetus thingies.
Yeah, that's the capital R, real. That's the real man.
The real.
And it ends well, right? Because they get together in the end.
True, yeah. That's the last scene of the movie. Like after like the machine in the moon is kind of going haywire, it cuts to white. And then we see the woman with the strange cheeks running over to Spencer, and she's giving him like a loving hug or embrace. And yeah, that's basically the end of the movie.
Yeah, I think people often make too much of David Lynch's stuff. Like they look too deeply into it.
Oh yeah, there's way too much over-interpretation of his visual style, and I think he's pretty good at, if he wants you to pay attention to a certain visual element, like he shows it. He shows it a lot, like with the worm-like thingy, or the closet, or the radiator. Like all of these things are shown repeatedly in the movie, so that people really get, okay, this is important, I have to pay attention to this, right?
Yeah.
But then there's also like people who really get into, what kind of clothing is he wearing? And then one scene for half a second there was this thing in the background, and later on it appeared again for half a second, and what does it mean? I think that's probably a bit too much.
Yeah, or this person is wearing a red jacket in this scene, and then 5 episodes later another character is also wearing a red jacket, so obviously these two are related, but sometimes they're not, right? And I think this is kind of part of humans being humans, right? We love patterns and causal relationships between things, and when David Lynch sometimes just puts stuff in because he finds it aesthetically pleasing, or thinks that object or person or line of dialogue or whatever appearing at that time kind of suits the mood, people will always look to try to find this connection, this thing in there, and to be honest, Lynch kind of encourages that behavior, right?
Oh yeah, he does. I mean, his movies, they are like puzzles, I guess, he wants people to solve, and he gives them little breadcrumbs, and sometimes very overtly points towards like important stuff where
with
you should
like
place the focus of your attention. But
we were like Nolan. He's setting up a puzzle, which then he's going to give you the answer in the end, and you can either go, "Oh, that's clever. I didn't think of that," or you'll go, "Oh, I had figured it out," and then you can feel pleased about yourself, right? That becomes part of the satisfaction of the movie, right? Of the, maybe you enjoy the action scenes or the dialogue or the whatever, and then you can also enjoy being tricked, but then the whole thing making sense, or figuring out the puzzle, and you can feel smart about yourself, right? But then with Lynch, he won't give you the total answer in the end, right?
Yeah,
so
it's always very ambiguous, and it's not really clear. There's no one interpretation of Eraserhead, probably. I don't think he ever comments on his movies and tells people,
yes,
okay, this is exactly what I had in mind.
Thankfully, he doesn't, as he should not comment.
Oh yeah, I mean that would totally ruin like his entire life's work, right?
Yeah, I mean the movies, the movie happens, starts at minute 0 and ends at minute 90 or whatever with Eraserhead, and in my opinion, the work should stand on its own, right? You shouldn't have to, no work of kind of movie art should need a companion book of interviews or coffee table book with interpretations, etc. It should stand on its own, even if it's confusing or it doesn't make sense. Then the confusion and the not making sense are part of the experience of the person watching.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean that's part of the enjoyment for me of watching Lynch movies, which is like I know it's gonna be kind of strange and maybe doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it's either a very enticing viewing experience or it's not, right?
Yeah. That's how I see it. I personally I don't enjoy when things are explained because they just become banal, right? If David Lynch wanted to explain that bit, he would have explained that bit.
Yeah, he would have done it, right?
Yeah. So for me, these works should stand on their own, right? They start and they end, and that is like a unity that should stand on its own, not go, oh, I made this film and I put a lot of red herrings and the symbols which nobody's gonna understand unless they were born where I was born, went to school where I went to school, watched the movies and read the books I watched and read, and who had parents exactly like mine. Fine, you can do that, but then somebody engaging with your work should be able to get whatever you want that person to get. Like, and if you want to make things occult, hide things and make things ambiguous or make things symbolic or then it's up to you, right? As a creator, and the audience kind of should engage with things as they are, right? A book by itself, a movie by itself. And I think in that sense, Eraserhead succeeds as a movie.
Oh yeah, it's certainly like the whole style carries the movie to a certain extent, I think. Because plot-wise, there's not so much there because it's all kind of disconnected at points where you have these random scenes thrown in that don't really fit into the overall arching narrative. But then again, there isn't much narrative to begin with, so it's more style than there is narrative going on.
Yeah.
And I guess about the ending of the movie, this is something I'm not really sure about either. Do you think him killing the baby is taken to be taken literally, or is it more metaphorically for him overcoming his fear of being a father or coming to terms with this new situation?
I'll go literally.
Okay, on that note, that spooky note, I guess it's time to end this podcast.
Yeah, not many films where the protagonist kills their own baby, right?
Infanticide. Yeah.
It's not that common.
I think it certainly would make the movie a lot darker and less cheesy if we are going with that interpretation. But again, it's left ambiguous, and you can watch it and go away with either conclusion, I guess.
Yeah. And just kind of leave a final note for our antinatalist listeners. This movie has nothing to do with antinatalism, okay?
Oh no.
Please.
And Lynch is certainly not an antinatalist. He has, I think, like 3 or 4 kids, all from different women. So this is probably where this fear of becoming a father came from originally, right?
Yeah, I think his first,
like him just knocking up girls left and right.
yeah, his first child had clubbed feet, right? So
Oh, I actually didn't know.
Jennifer Lynch, who later became a production designer and writer director herself, I think she was born with club feet, where you need kind of the feet kind of point inwards, and you need to put them on kind of these special shoes, and so the bones kind of grow in the right direction. But it's an imperfect child, right? So I think and she
it's no sperm baby, but yeah.
Yeah, and she had definitely been born by the time David Lynch started making this film, by the way.
Yeah, I think he's definitely inspired by his personal experience there, which was interesting, I guess, to discuss, because neither of us, of course, will have, or probably will have, the experience of all of a sudden becoming a father.
Well, not a bio father, that's for sure.
Yeah, so I think it was interesting to take a look at this movie specifically.
Yes,
because it's just something. It's an experience that's like, just by virtue of what the experience is very alien to me, I guess.
Yeah, and plus, in our community, we hear people talk about their nightmares of becoming a parent quite often, right?
Oh yeah, this movie is this nightmare personified.
Yeah,
basically.
Although a lot of the stories I hear or read, I guess, are about women who do not want to become mothers, or at least biological mothers, and they have dreams where they're pregnant or they're giving birth. So that's the other Eraserhead you can make.
Oh yeah, you could make a female version of this, because like this movie is like solely focusing on Henry Spencer's perspective, so it's a male perspective, obviously.
Yeah. And of course that movie would probably be even more body horror than this one.
Oh yeah, like just imagine like Lynch making a scene like the birth scene. Like just imagine what that would have looked like if Lynch had made it about Mary instead of Henry.
Oh God! All right, let's not imagine that too much. Even for Halloween, that's too spooky.
Too spooky
for Halloween. All right, thanks very much for listening. Right. We'll be back next week, and be sure to, I don't know where you're listening to this, but if it's on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel and kind of give us a like. If you're listening to this on a podcast, then subscribe us in whatever directory you're listening, if it's iTunes or Spotify or one of the others, and make sure you follow all the episodes. If you got like any comments or just want to send us a note or things you think we should cover, email us at voidwavepodcast@gmail.com and we'll get back to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for listening again, and take care. Bye bye.